In a quiet New England town, a young female mechanic named Layla Carter was called to fix a leaky pipe in a church basement. What she found instead was beyond imagination, an ancient object found in the church, buried under dust and time. No one expected a lost relic to surface. No one expected it to change lives. But when the nuns revealed its true history, Layla's quiet world was turned upside down. This emotional story of mystery, faith, and rediscovery, all beginning with an ancient object found in a church, will move you in ways you never saw coming. But before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? We love seeing our global family in the comments. Let's get started. Layla worked at her late father's garage, just a stone's throw from the old St. Agnes Chapel. The chapel, with its creaking wood floors and ivy-covered walls, had stood silent witness to generations, tucked away like a forgotten secret. Layla, with oil-stained hands and a heart that still grieved, had never thought herself the curious type until one rainy afternoon changed everything. The nuns who still lived there had asked her for a small favor to fix a faulty heating pipe in the cellar. She agreed, not expecting anything more than rusted metal and cobwebs. But as she navigated the dim, damp basement, her foot caught on something buried beneath years of dust and neglect. When she knelt and brushed it off, what she found was no ordinary debris. It was a disc, wide, heavy, and strangely beautiful. The engravings shimmered faintly in the cellar's soft light. Layla had no idea that what she'd uncovered wasn't just an object, it was a story waiting to be told. One that would stir memories the nuns had kept quiet for decades, and bring tears to more than just her eyes. Layla stood still for a long moment. Her breath caught in her throat as she cradled the disc in her hands. It was cold and heavier than it looked, nearly 3 feet across, and etched with swirling patterns that seemed to shift under the faint glow of the cellar's light bulb. She ran her fingers over the surface, the metal smooth in some places, ridged in others like it had been made with impossible precision. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Not in textbooks, not in museums, and certainly not under the floorboards of a crumbling church. At first, she thought it might have been some kind of ornament, left behind by a past generation, but the craftsmanship, it whispered of something older, deeper. The sound of footsteps overhead snapped her out of the trance. Sister Eleanor, the eldest of the nuns, called down gently. "Layla, are you all right, dear?" Layla carried the object upstairs with care, her arms trembling not from the weight, but from the overwhelming sense that this thing, whatever it was, had been waiting to be found. The nuns gathered around her in the chapel's small kitchen, their eyes wide with disbelief. Sister Zoe gasped, her teacup rattling on the saucer. "This can't be," she whispered. But it was Sister Eleanor, her voice steadier than the others, who stepped forward and placed a wrinkled hand on Layla's shoulder. "I've seen drawings of something like this when I was a novice, back in Italy, in a dusty journal passed down from a nun who came before. It was never verified. Most called it myth." The room fell quiet. Outside, the rain pelted the stained glass windows, casting fractured colors on the floor. Inside, hearts beat louder than the thunder. Sister Eleanor continued. "There's an old legend, something we were told never to speak of too openly, a relic hidden beneath the chapel long ago, not to protect it from man, but to protect man from it." Layla blinked. "You think it's dangerous?" "No, child," Eleanor said softly. "Not dangerous, powerful." The sisters began pulling books from shelves, journals wrapped in cloth, notes passed from one generation to the next. What they pieced together was hazy, filled with fragments of oral tradition and sketches too faint to offer real clarity. But the pattern was clear enough an object with solar imagery, used long before Christianity arrived in the region, something that symbolized protection, healing, and transition, a bridge between belief systems, between eras. The disc, they realized, may have been placed there deliberately preserved beneath the chapel. Not discarded. It wasn't lost. It had been hidden, safeguarded. "I don't understand," Layla said quietly. "Why me? Why now?" It was Sister Zoe who answered this time. "You weren't meant to find it, dear. It was meant to be found by someone with heart, with sorrow, with strength." Tears burned in Layla's eyes. She hadn't told them, but they somehow knew. Knew about her father the way he died in the garage, just a few months ago. Knew about how she'd spent every day since trying to fill the hollow space he left behind. Fixing things. Fixing cars. Fixing herself. That night, they placed the disc on a linen-covered table at the front of the chapel. Candles were lit. And as the flames flickered across the bronze surface, something stirred in Layla, something she hadn't felt in months. Wonder. By morning, word had already begun to spread. The local librarian, a friend of Sister Eleanor's, called in a contact from the university. A historian named Dr. Mason Clark arrived 2 days later. Skeptical, but intrigued. When he first laid eyes on the disc, he staggered backward. "This is," he stammered, "this is impossible." He explained that the design's radiating lines, concentric circles, and faded symbols matched patterns seen in early European solar worship, dating back to the late Roman or even pre-Christian periods. And yet, the disc also contained markings that looked eerily similar to early Christian inscriptions. The two didn't belong together, but they were somehow blended seamlessly. "It's not just a relic, Dr. Clark whispered. "It's a message." Layla stood beside him, still in her grease-streaked coveralls, trying to make sense of it all. What kind of message? He turned to her. That even in times of great division, people searched for unity. This disc might have been created at a time when beliefs clashed. But instead of destruction, someone chose harmony. And just like that, Layla felt something shift inside her, a breaking and a healing. It was never about fixing the disc. It was about letting it fix something in her. A week after the discovery, the chapel no longer felt forgotten. Cars now lined the narrow road that once led only to silence. Pilgrims, professors, skeptics, and seekers arrived, each drawn by a story that had only just begun. Layla tried to stay grounded, spending her mornings in the garage and her evenings with the sisters, helping to organize viewing times for the disc. But inside her, something was changing. One chilly morning, before the sun had fully broken through the mist, Sister Eleanor asked Layla to accompany her back into the cellar, not for repairs this time, but for a memory. "There's something I need you to see," the elderly nun said softly, her voice trembling with age, or maybe anticipation. They moved slowly down the narrow steps. The air was damp again, thick with silence. Eleanor led her to a back wall, half covered by an old shelving unit. Together, they pushed it aside, revealing a small wooden door no larger than a cupboard. It had no handle, just a carved symbol that mirrored one of the markings on the disc. Layla's heart began to pound. Eleanor reached into her robe and pulled out a key. This hasn't been used in over 60 years. The last nun to turn it was Sister Francesca. She swore she heard music the night she found what's inside. The lock clicked, rusty but obedient. The door creaked open. Inside was a shallow niche, and in it sat something wrapped in velvet the color of old blood. Eleanor unwrapped it slowly. Beneath the cloth was a small bronze pendant, an exact miniature of the disc Layla had uncovered. Its surface shimmered in the lantern light. But what made Layla gasp wasn't the object itself. It was the photo beneath it. A black and white image of a young woman, maybe in her 20s, standing beside the pendant. Her hair was pulled into a bun, her eyes steady and wide, and around her neck was the same necklace. "That's her," Eleanor whispered. "That's Sister Francesca. She found the pendant just after the war ended, said it came to her in a dream. She believed it was tied to something bigger, but no one believed her. They locked it away, told her to forget." Layla stared at the photo. The pendant. The disc upstairs. It was all connected. All part of a puzzle that had waited for generations. "I don't understand," Layla said quietly. "You don't have to," Eleanor replied. "You only have to listen." Later that day, something even stranger happened. While Dr. Clark and his team examined the disc with infrared scanners, one of the interns called out. "There's something underneath," he said. "It's faint, but it's there." The images revealed a second layer of inscriptions, ones that weren't visible to the naked eye. They were written in a blend of ancient Latin and a Proto-Germanic script. A single phrase repeated across the border. "In luce unitas, in tenebris memoria, in light unity, in darkness remembrance." The room fell silent. It was as if the disc was speaking not just to scholars, but to everyone willing to listen. Layla stood near the doorway, watching as people leaned in closer. But for her, it wasn't about translation anymore. It was about understanding. The pendant, the disc, the quiet chapel cellar. It was never about history locked in books or relics under glass. It was about people like Sister Francesca, who believed when no one else did. People like Layla, who needed something to believe in. And just like that, something within her cracked open, not with pain, but with clarity. What she'd found in that cellar was more than an artifact. It was a whisper from the past, a reminder that faith and truth don't always arrive with answers. Sometimes, they arrive with questions we're finally ready to ask. The following Sunday, Layla found herself sitting alone in the chapel just before dawn. The pew beneath her creaked, and outside the windows, fog clung to the ground like a sleeping ghost. The disc rested in its display at the altar, softly lit by candlelight. No visitors, no cameras, just silence. And her. She had spent the past few days helping Dr. Clark's team, sorting through translations and organizing interviews. But what occupied her mind wasn't academic. It was emotional, spiritual. She couldn't stop thinking about the phrase inscribed on the disc, in light, unity, in darkness, remembrance. The words haunted her in the best way, echoing late into the night when she closed the garage, when she wiped grease from her hands, when she passed the photo of her father that still hung over the workbench. Was this what he meant when he used to say, "Some things are built to last"? Layla, not because they're strong, but because someone believed in them. The disc wasn't just surviving time, it was surviving doubt. And she realized, perhaps for the first time, that she had been living in survival mode too. Since the day her father passed, she'd been piecing herself back together like an engine that couldn't quite turn over. Working, fixing, hiding. But now, something in her was awakening. The sisters had noticed it too. Sister Zoe began calling her our curious child. Sister Eleanor would often rest a hand on her shoulder and simply whisper, "Thank you." Even the townspeople had started looking at her differently, not just as the local mechanic, but as the girl who found something sacred. And yet, with the admiration came confusion. Was it really faith stirring inside her, or just the weight of awe? She turned to Sister Eleanor that morning, and asked the question that had kept her awake for nights. Why do you think it chose now? Why not when Francesca found the pendant? Why not decades ago? The nun smiled, her eyes filled with a deep and patient knowing. Because, dear Layla, truth arrives when it's needed most, not when we demand it. She paused, then added, You see an object. But what you've uncovered is continuity, proof that belief can be carried, buried, and still rise again. Layla had no words, only a feeling in her chest that pulsed like light behind her ribs. She began returning to the chapel daily, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She'd sit near the disc and listen. Not to voices, but to the quiet, to the shift in her own breathing, to the way the room felt different, now fuller. Somehow, Dr. Clark, sensing her connection, gave her a scanned 3D print of the disc's central symbol. She wore it on a cord around her neck, just like Sister Francesca had once done. At first, she wore it with hesitation. But soon, it became second nature. And people noticed. One afternoon, a young girl came up to her and said, Are you the girl who touched the sun? Layla chuckled, confused. The disc, the child explained. My mom said it has sun rays. She said it brings light to people who are sad. Layla knelt, touched the girl's shoulder, and whispered, Then I guess, maybe I was sad too. She wasn't trying to be wise. She wasn't trying to be a symbol, but she was changing. And it was no longer just about the artifact, it was about how it made people feel. She had walked into that cellar to fix a pipe. Now, she was helping fix something else, something harder to name. Not just in others, but in herself. The news of the artifact had gone far beyond the town borders by now. What began as whispers in the parish had become headlines. Journalists from Boston, then New York, and eventually even London started reaching out. Layla's name appeared in articles she never expected to read, usually paired with titles like The Mechanic Who Unearthed a Mystery or Small-Town Miracle Tied to Ancient Europe. But amidst the media frenzy, something quieter and far more powerful was unfolding within the town itself. Local businesses were seeing a surge in visitors. The diner added the Sun Disc Omelette to its menu. The bookstore set up a corner shelf for local history and spirituality. Even Layla's garage had new customers, not because their engines failed, but because they just wanted to meet the girl who found the light. It was surreal. But the most unexpected opportunity came not from the news or the tourists, but from Dr. Clark, who returned one afternoon with a proposal that caught Layla off guard. We've spoken to the Historical Foundation, he said, seated across from her in the chapel's side room. They want to fund a project not just to study the disc, but to create a permanent heritage site here, a place for learning, for reflection. Layla looked at him, unsure. You mean a museum? He nodded. Sort of. But not like the sterile ones. This would be alive with storytelling, community programs, a center for spiritual exploration, even local art. And they want you to be part of it. She laughed nervously, incredulously. Me, I fix carburetors, not curate exhibits. Dr. Clark leaned forward, voice gentle but firm. But you're the reason people care. You didn't just discover the disc, you listened to it. That's what makes this place different. It's not about artifacts, it's about meaning. And people feel that when they talk to you. It wasn't flattery, it was truth. And she felt it settle into her chest like the final piece of a jigsaw puzzle. Later that evening, Layla sat with the sisters in the chapel garden. The air was crisp, and fireflies danced in the twilight. She told them about the Foundation's offer. Sister Zoe clapped her hands together with joy, while Sister Eleanor simply smiled and said, We always knew you were more than what you fixed. And perhaps that was the point, all her life. Layla had used her hands to repair what was broken spark plugs, gaskets, bent axles. But this was something else. This was restoration, not of things, but of hope, of history, of connection. She said yes, but with conditions. I don't want it to be about fame, she told Dr. Clark the next morning. I want it to be about faith, not religion, but that feeling people get when they stand in front of the disc. That unspoken something. He agreed wholeheartedly. And soon, plans were drawn. Architects came to preserve the chapel's structure while making room for learning spaces. The cellar would remain untouched sacred ground. The pendant and the disc would be displayed side by side in a glass case made to resemble the night sky, with soft lights that pulsed like stars. And Layla! She was given a new title she never expected, Keeper of the Light. Not official, just something the sisters started calling her and the townspeople picked up. She kept working at the garage, still fixing engines, still cleaning grease from her fingernails. But every afternoon, she would return to the chapel, to greet visitors, to tell the story, to stand quietly with those who wept at the sight of the disc, not knowing exactly why, only that it moved them. For the first time in her life, Layla didn't feel like she had to carry everything alone. Now, she was part of something bigger, a bridge between the past and the present, a light in the dark. And she wasn't just fixing anymore, she was healing. It wasn't overnight. Healing never is. But over the weeks that followed, something in Layla began to settle like dust in the sun, finally choosing a place to rest. The girl who once kept her sleeves rolled down to hide the oil stains now wore her grease proudly. But the pendant hanging around her neck told a different story, one of reverence, one of becoming. She didn't fully understand the disc, not the inscriptions, not the metallurgy, not even why it had chosen her to be the one to find it. But what she did understand, what had become clear, was the way it made her feel. Seen, chosen, connected. Each time she spoke to a visitor in the chapel, she heard bits of her own story mirrored back to her. A man who had lost his son in an accident. A woman who hadn't stepped foot in a church for 30 years, but stood in front of the disc with tears pouring down her cheeks. A teenager who said quietly, "I don't know why, but this place makes my heart feel like it's breathing again." Layla never had the perfect words. She didn't pretend to be wise. She just listened. And somehow, in that sacred silence between strangers, healing passed like light through stained glass, broken pieces, still beautiful, still full of color. But the hardest healing came not from others. It came from within. One evening, after everyone had gone home and the sun had dipped low enough to turn the windows golden, Layla stood before the disc alone. The chapel creaked with the weight of age, and the candlelight danced along the bronze surface. Her hands trembled as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded letter, creased and smudged, one she'd never had the courage to open until now. Her father's handwriting. It was the letter he'd written before the surgery, the one the doctor said he might not come back from. She unfolded it slowly, breath caught in her throat. "Layla, if you're reading this, it means life didn't give me a second chance. But you still have yours. I know you don't believe in fate, but I've always believed in you. You see the world like an engine. Parts, pieces, pressure. You think if you work hard enough, you can fix anything. But some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be carried. Let go of what you can't change. Kiddo. And promise me this when you find something that makes you feel like the world's whispering directly to your heart. Don't walk away. That's when you stay. Love always. Dad." Her knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, tears streaming freely. Not the kind of tears that came from sadness, but from release, from the unshackling of guilt she had worn like a second skin, for not being there at the hospital in time, for not knowing how to say goodbye, for surviving when he didn't. She wept beneath the disc, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel broken. She felt held. Sister Eleanor found her there, sometime later, sitting quietly with the letter pressed to her chest, without a word. The old nun sat beside her, taking her hand. "You're not alone, child," she said softly, "and you never were." From that day forward, Layla no longer questioned why the disc had chosen to reveal itself when it did. She stopped trying to solve it like a puzzle. Instead, she treated it like a story, one that had found her just when she needed it most. And slowly, she began writing a new story of her own. Not one built from engines and grief, but one rooted in light, unity, and memory. 6 months had passed since Layla found the disc beneath the chapel. The seasons had shifted. The trees that once stood bare and shivering outside St. Agnes Chapel now bloomed with vibrant green, as if the earth itself had been quietly watching her transformation and decided to join in. The small chapel, once echoing with silence, was now full nearly every day, not just with tourists or scholars, but with people, real people, people searching for something they couldn't name. Some came for history, some came for healing, but most came because they had heard about her. The girl who found the light, they called her. Layla never quite got used to the title. She still changed her own oil, still worked on engines behind the shop, still wiped her hands on the same old rag that had belonged to her dad. But there was a softness to her now, a quiet steadiness in the way she walked, the way she smiled, the way she listened. And she listened a lot. She heard stories from strangers who'd lost everything and didn't know how to move forward. From people who hadn't prayed in years but found themselves kneeling before the disc without knowing why. From children who asked questions no historian could answer, but somehow made the most sense. One afternoon, an older woman arrived alone, dressed in black, carrying nothing but a small envelope. She walked straight to Layla, pressed the envelope into her hands, and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me that it's okay to remember." Inside was a photograph of a boy, no older than 16. On the back, one sentence, "He loved the stars." Layla placed the photo near the pendant in the chapel's memorial alcove, a small space they had created for offerings, flowers, notes, photos, wishes. No one had planned it. It had simply happened, like everything else in this story. The Foundation's Learning Center was almost complete by now. A team of artists had painted a mural on the interior dome of the chapel, a swirling sunburst wrapped in golden script that read, "In light, unity. In darkness, remembrance." When she first saw it, Layla cried, not from sadness, but from knowing how many people had poured pieces of themselves into this place. It wasn't just a church anymore. It was a sanctuary for anyone who carried something too heavy to bear alone. And perhaps the most powerful moment of all came quietly one spring morning. Layla stood before a small group of students on a field trip. She held a replica of the disc in her hands as she spoke, not like a scholar, not like a guide, but like a friend. "You don't need to understand everything right away," she told them. "Some things are meant to stay mysterious, but that doesn't make them less real. You know what this disc taught me?" The kids leaned in, eyes wide. That we're all carrying something ancient inside us, stories, pain, hope, questions. And if we're lucky, we find a place where those things can rest, even just for a while. A boy in the front row raised his hand and asked, "Do you think it was magic?" Layla smiled. I think the real magic is that it found you, just like it found me. As the children filed out, chattering and pointing at the sunlight catching the disc's golden edge, Layla stayed behind. She looked around the chapel at the murals, the photos, the notes, the people. She took a deep breath and whispered the words she had never said aloud until now. I'm not lost anymore. Because she wasn't. She was found. Sometimes. The things we're meant to find aren't hidden at all. They're simply waiting for us to be ready. The ancient disc Layla discovered wasn't just a forgotten artifact buried beneath an old church. It was a quiet invitation, a call to pause, to reflect, and to reconnect with the past, with one another, and most of all, with ourselves. In a world that moves too fast, we often look for meaning in the spectacular. But true transformation lives in stillness, in silence, in the simple act of listening. Layla's journey reminds us that healing doesn't always come through answers. It comes through presence, through choosing to stay when it's easier to walk away, through believing in something even when we don't fully understand it. Sometimes, all it takes is one small light in a dark place to change everything. And sometimes, that light is you. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories waiting to find you. Click to keep the light going, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe forgotten things deserve to be found.